Hello, everyone. I'm Yuvika Wahi, the editor at Rental Scale. Thank you so much for joining in today. Today, we are talking about a serious new change in the Italian short-term rental landscape. We're talking about Italy's new regulation banning self-check-ins for short-term rentals, which has sent ripples across the industry, obviously particularly for professional managers. The regulation actually went into effect November 18 and is now being implemented, and it prohibits the use of key lock boxes and digital keypads for guest access, and also requires in-person identity verification at check-in. This is obviously going to make a huge impact across the industry for operators of all sizes. And I am really happy to have with me today Marco Cellani, who's actually really well placed to comment on the news, to understand a little bit more about why such a rule was implemented, what its impact is going to be in Italy and perhaps elsewhere, as well as what you can do to adapt. Hello, Marco. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hello, Yuvika. Thanks for having me.
I am so glad that you could make it. I don't think there could be a better person to comment on this news, as you have perspective as an operator, being an operator yourself, and you are also part of the advocacy in short-term rental in Italy. So I'm really grateful for you to have joined us. Before we get started, can you please introduce yourself for our viewers?
Okay, I am Marco Celani. I'm the CEO of Italian Way, which is one of the most important companies in the Italian landscape in terms of property management network. And I also chair the Italian National Association of Property Managers.
Thank you, Marco. So, as you can see, you're a property manager yourself. This news directly impacts you. And you have a very clear understanding of steps that might have led to a regulation like this. Can you tell us a little bit about what you think is the motivation behind the regulation, behind this
Yeah,
ban?
okay. Well, the motivation, I would say that it's a national motivation much more related to the, let's say, over tourism perception that most of the media and the politics is feeling in this very instant in the Italian scenario. But I would say that it is not a new regulation, the one that we are facing in this very last few weeks, because it really didn't happen anything in terms of new modification to the rules, because the Italian law of public safety is dated 1931, and it is not a new rule that has been adopted, but it is a very strict interpretation given by the head of the national police with an internal directive to the local police station. So basically, what was in place ever since, and what do they think to do from this moment ongoing? Actually, Italy is one of the few countries in Europe where the property managers, but also the single host or the hotel sectors, bed and breakfast, or whatever structure giving hospitality to someone, is obliged to recognize the guests and also collect the documents for all of the guests and fill in a form sending this information to the police within 24 hours from the check-in. So this is the rule in place since 1931. What is changing is the interpretation that is at the moment telling us that we are not more allowed to recognize people, to identify people remotely. Meaning that we cannot just use the same technology we use to open cash bank accounts, to do cash transfer, to give our identity for public authorities every kind of documentation or rent a car, but we have personally the obligation to identify these people. And this obviously would be a showstopper for all the sharing economy and for all the digitalization also of the public sector. So obviously, within our let's say, advocacy activity, we started to meet and to chase the most important politicians in the country, asking for a meeting with the head of police and with the Minister of Internal Policy, in order to let them understand that we are acting as an industry and we do have a lot of technological modern instruments able to comply with what is the regulation today. So we hope that they will be reasonable and they will go back with the decision they made so far.
Thank you for sharing that, Marco. And that does clarify how this is not, like you said, this is not a new rule per se, but a new interpretation of a rule that has existed for a while, which is really helpful to know. Obviously, makes one wonder why such a stricter enforcement and such a simplified interpretation of the rule has come about. But you said that you already your advocacy action is already in place. And so, what is it that you would suggest to policymakers to make this regulation more practical without undermining its objectives, for example?
Well, I mean, basically, what we are trying to convince them is that the tools we are already using to recognize guests are reliable. And probably they just thought that most of the guests were coming through, an Airbnb on Booking.com booking and getting straight through the apartments without meeting anyone, without giving any kind of documentation, and just having their access through a key box wrapped somewhere in the middle of the street. So that this, I believe, was their idea. So now we have to change their minds and show them that we have tools, that we do recognition, that we sign off contracts with a strong authentication procedure, and that we already have a track record of people who have been arrested because we have identified them before they check in and we have noticed their documents to the police stations. So this is already something in process because we already had conversations with the head of local police stations, and they are starting to understand. So I think that at some point they will be reasonable, even because it is not a matter of economic sanction respect. There is not just a ticket that you have to pay. It's at the moment you may go to jail for 3 months if you are not if you are not recognizing the guest as per their interpretation. So you have up to 600,000 hosts that have a real potential risk respect this interpretation.
That is not a small number, and that has potential impact for the travel industry in Italy at large. Also, if such a large number of hosts are impacted, it is going to impact the industry too. But in the meantime, that you are trying to negotiate more understanding and a better interpretation of the laws. What are you doing at Italian Way, for example, to adapt to the situation so that other operators might take some inspiration from you, or if they can get involved, how might they do so?
Yeah, I mean, in Italian way, we are quite big. So, just as an example, in Milan, we manage about 700 apartments. So we have physical welcome points. So they are reception where customers, guests can come to pick up their keys or to get physically recognized. So we can just shift our fast check-in process, telling the guests to come and meet our employees for physical recognition. We don't think this makes sense because this bothers guests, and we basically just stopped doing this process a couple of months ago. So we were just shifting to the full remote approach. But I would say that this is an option for everyone in the next future. But I mean, just to implement a physical reception where guests may be belonging to different property management companies. So maybe this could have a positive impact of on merger and increase of the average size of property management companies. But I don't think that this should happen because I think that it is exactly the opposite trend that is required by the market. I mean, guests do not want to meet anybody. They want to be free to get to their apartments without meeting anyone. And I think that being this the most common approach everywhere in the world, we should not be the first point on going back to 1931.
I think that makes sense. But what you're also saying is that this potentially can change the dynamic within the industry. Obviously, this seems to create more pressure on smaller operators. If you're smaller operators with properties, a very handful of properties across different destinations, you obviously can't have a person available at each one of them. It's not feasible to hire someone to
Yeah.
receive the guests at each one of those. So it does create more pressure on smaller
Yes,
operators.
for sure. I would say that overall, the number of restrictions and also daily attacks from the press and from the local policy is creating an environment where small operators or single hosts may desire to be under the umbrella of a larger operator, and this may really bring to wider companies and mergers and increase of the average size. And I think that this is a good opportunity for the market. But I hope, being a liberal attitude, I think that this should just naturally happen. It should not be driven or forced by the government.
That makes sense. And what advice would you have for operators who perhaps want to support you in your advocacy efforts, or if they are trying to become more active within their community of short-term rental regulations and kind of hopefully influence the discussion around regulations within their market?
Yeah, we have a lot of conversation across the country with small operators, and our advice is always to put them together. Do not stand alone, but get within association. In Italy, you have a lot of local association, which is good in a way because they have an attitude to impact local regulations and local regulators, but they need to cope with the national framework. So for them, it is required, and I think they cannot avoid doing this anymore to associate to a national and larger association as a IGAB is, because this is much more effective in dealing with the national politics.
And why do you think, I mean, I'm assuming obviously the size of the organization is just the sheer number of operators within your network would influence this. Why do you think larger associations are better placed to help negotiate terms within national frameworks?
Well, that's mainly because politics deal with organizations that are representative of people and representative of votes. So if you stand in front of a minister or in front of a city mayor, and you're able to tell them that you represent not only a huge component of the local or national GDP, but also you are directly enforced by a huge number of associates, you will get more power, and it will be easier for you to deal with the politics.
That makes sense. Thank you, Marco. Those were all my questions. I think the situation is still developing, and you and your team and your association are working towards figuring it all out. I'm sure all the operators appreciate that. Do you have any parting words for our viewers? Anything more you'd like to say?
Well, I mean, I think that 2025 is going to be a very tough year because we are going to implement a lot of new regulations, both at national and local level. We are going to face European Union regulation. So I think that we will need to cope with not a lot of new rules. So this will bring to concentration in the market and to a number of restrictions that will require a lot of advocacy. So my suggestion is really to get informed about this and cope with this.
Makes sense. I mean, we've already seen huge examples of that this year, sweeping changes across Barcelona. And now in France, the regulations are getting much stricter. So it makes total sense. I hope more people reach out to you as well to get involved with your association. I think that's a great place to start. I will share the link, obviously, in the description of this video as well as in the article, which is about the topic. And thank you so much, Marco, for sharing your thoughts with us. It's
Thank you
really
very much,
educational.
Yulika. Thank you very
Thank you.
much.